Hi, I want to welcome you to Answers for Today. I'm so blessed. I'm here in Southern California. Chris is down in Texas as he's enjoying the sunny weather down there. And my goodness, we have sunny weather here in Southern California. I did want to give you guys a heads up. Chris and I were talking here in a few weeks. We're going to have our good friend Bill Wynn joining us. He's all set up, and so we're going to be doing from three different areas. I think he's down in Palm Springs. Chris, you're in Texas. I'm in Southern California. Isn't the technology amazing what we could do?
It has come such a long way, hasn't it?
Yes, and the thing is that we just feel like we're still, laboring together for the Lord, and that's one thing that technology certainly could be used for evil, but we just thank God it's being used for good. We think that how this is broadcast on His channel, and years ago the internet wasn't even thought about for ministry of the gospel. It was just radio only, but now we see that we're able to bring this to them and right into their living room, their big screens and everything else, or also on their iPhone. They can watch on their laptops, their regular computers, their iPhones, or regular phones, or else their big screen TVs. Isn't it amazing what technology gives us now, Chris?
It really does change the whole dynamic of how we exchange information. And, there's even there are things that we see written as prophetic in the Bible. And we thought at some point in time, we've been able to wonder, how will they be able to do that? And we can answer some of those questions now. And so how is it that information, and how is it that the way that the world as we know how it will change and how it can be controlled? And we're seeing all of that. It's something that we live with now. We almost take it for granted.
Yes. Chris, one of the ways that you and I know, but let our audience know, is the way that we come up with various topics for the programs is by the questions that we get. Either Chris gets in Texas talking to people, or I get here, or else you email into us, and then we kind of compile them together. It's a little different than like just a Bible Answer Man program where you just take them as they're called in. We kind of compile them together as topics and talk about the various topics. And so if you have things that concern you about your life and the Bible and the person of Jesus, the end times, email them into us and we'll get to them eventually. And hopefully not only will bless you, but many other people who are watching us and or else listening to us on this program. In particular, we have one that deals with Chris about Jesus cleansing the temple. And how many times did he cleanse the temple? And why would you need to cleanse that temple, Chris? Is really the other question that they have on it. And why don't you give us a little idea? I believe it was twice, but why don't you clarify the cleansing of the temple for us?
Well, because of where they fit in the two places that we read about them in the Gospels, one is placed early in his ministry, the other one is placed later in his ministry. So we have the record of what's more than likely two of them. And for all that we know, he may have done so more than once, or more than twice for that matter. But we have record of what appear to be two, again, because of their placement in his ministry during the time of his ministry. But the cleansing of the temple, it wasn't a ritual thing like we might think, because there was the ceremonial cleansing that each person had to do as they would prepare to go into the temple. That was the going through what they called the mikvah, and that was to go in, and it was a ceremonial washing. And so the cleansing that we're talking about here is Jesus looked at it, and if we wonder why he did it, remember one of the times he's accounted as saying that you've taken this, what was intended to be a house of prayer, and his point was you've turned it into a place of merchandise. And so the unfair way of these people bringing what we believe the biggest problem was the people bringing their offerings and then them finding some technicality why it couldn't be offered, and then selling them one that would have been acceptable to the people there, but then charging exorbitant prices for it. But it was the merchandising of what should have been the worshipful house of God, where the faithful could come and worship their God and do the things that they were intending to do. And so the people had made themselves an obstacle, and it was a place of commerce, and that was his reason for doing it. The two stories that we have are pretty clear in that.
Chris, it's I think about if you correct me, I believe you're going to take a trip to Israel sometime this year, what you're hoping to take, right, Chris?
Well, actually, funny you asked that. We're putting together with the intention to go in the earlier part of May, and then again in October, because they've lifted the vaccine mandates there, which would really prevented a lot of people from wanting to go, and a lot of the restrictions are being removed, and I expect more within the next couple of months.
So, Chris, if somebody wants to take a trip to Israel, is there room on any one of those trips for them to be able to join you?
Sure, they have the ability to just contact me through our ministry's website, and yeah, we have spots open.
Okay, well, we'll put that information at the end of the program up on the screen for you. But the reason why I bring it up, Chris, because when you go over to Israel, like when I've been to Israel, over the years, you go and you see them how they around the temple area. You see how they dig things up, and now what they've seen. The last time I was there, and I think you were there after I was there, they uncovered these booths per se, or these little roadway leading into the temple where these money exchangers would set up their camp, and I'm thinking of Psalm 69:9, where it says, "The zeal of your house consumes me, the insult of those who insult falls upon me." And here it was. Can you imagine, Chris? People who God had made provision for those who can't afford things. They're just poor. They're just trying to get by, right? Where they could bring two pigeons of all things and offer us a sacrifice, and these money changers were sitting in the way, kind of as a gatekeeper. You can't get through unless you come see us first. And they would say your pigeon isn't good enough, and so you need to buy our certified. Have a stamp of approval on it, kind of, and where they would charge these amazing prices, and that would be upon it. And isn't that really, as we talk about the cleansing of the temple, kind of what we see in Jesus is that how he was seeing how the regular people were being greatly taken advantage of.
Yes, and that was why he drove them out. And if people want to look at it, there's the remnant of what was known as the Robinson Arch. That's what's been given to it as the archaeological name. But it was an entrance into the temple complex on the southwest corner. And you can see where it used to be attached to the actual stonework there, and along like you were saying, along the base of it is a series of little carve outs, if you will, places where people could have set up, if you will, booths, and they're close to those things that I had mentioned, the mikvahs. They were all in that part of it where all the commercial things could have taken place, the ceremonial, if you will, before entering into the temple. So yeah, there you can see them to this day right there in Jerusalem.
So you can go to, if you want to read the account, you obviously the first time in John chapter 2, you could see that in, I think, verses 11 through 12, and then also, of course, in the triumphal entry in Matthew chapter 21, where he talks about it. But he went in there as a man's man, per se. Chris, I love this about Jesus, where he saw the injustice being done, and he wasn't afraid of anybody. Tell him what happens when he walks in and sees those money changers, Chris.
Yeah, well, he drives them out. So you could say he shut down the shop for a day. It was a matter of turning over tables. It was disrupting everything that they were doing because of the injustice of it. And, I'm sure that they probably did the same to even the rich as well. It was a way of extorting people who were at a place where they had to offer something to the Lord. And so they really had them in a very difficult place. So these people who could determine whether or not something was acceptable, because as you know, and I'm sure that most of the listeners would know as well, the people were obligated to do these things. And the obligation was that the offering was to be without spot or blemish. And that's one of those things where, well, they're gonna, if you're looking for it, you're gonna find some kind of a quote spot or blemish, and then of course you can come to the rescue and say, but this will be acceptable, and here's what the price tag is on it. I think it's a good cautionary tale as well for the church today, because without doing it in the way of offerings, we do a lot of things, or we see a lot of things in the church that would really kind of qualify for this same thing, that the churches have merchandised people, and that they are going to be prevented from doing this or that around and in the church without some kind of a financial cost involved with it. And there's a good portion of Christianity that puts such an enormous price tag, if you will, on the material things, and people are expected to pony up, if you will, and that God would withhold his blessing if you don't give.
Yeah, I think most of the audience knows, Chris. I grew up underneath Pastor Chuck Smith for 40 years over at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and we would always get people come through, various artists that want to sell their merchandise, or a book guy. Maybe we're having a prophecy conference and everybody wants to sell their books and all that, and they always wanted to set up in the lobby per se, where people just came in. And Pastor Chuck, especially for many, many years, I mean, the latter years, it seems like the books were getting a little closer to the sanctuary, but he refused to have them inside the sanctuary, even close of it, basically because he didn't want anybody to be merchandised or taken advantage. And if they wanted to buy a book, go down to the bookstore per se, or have it away from it. Don't mix it with the worship and the teaching and all that. And I really respected that, where, so often we feel like, oh, if we get products, then they can, sell a bunch of books, and this is all going to advance the ministry of Jesus Christ. No, he doesn't need our help that way, does he, Chris?
Right. Well, it's funny because you could tell that we've come from the same family of churches, and Jack, my pastor, was one of the early pastors, and around the early days, I should say. And he didn't even like to have things like, well, we're going to do a car wash or a bake sale or this, that, or the other thing. And it was really tough to get Jack to sign off on those things, because he says, I don't want the people to feel merchandised. And that was the word that we kept hearing used. You've used it, I've used it, because we heard it from the people that we looked up to and saw the heads of the ministries that we were a part of. And I think that there is, in their understanding, a very good recognition of what the underlying problem was with Jesus doing what he did in the temple. It was supposed to be a solemn, holy, sacred place that people had found a way to make it into a money-making kind of an endeavor.
And I think it's, before we, I remember a good friend of mine used to say, before we point fingers at those guys, we got to remember there's a bunch of fingers being pointed back at us, that we examine our own hearts to make sure that our ministry, the things that we do, are really for the Lord. And I had this old saying that I heard from a friend of mine: if I take care of his business, he'll take care of my business. And his business is the proclaiming of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I don't have to go back to my marketing schemes and everything else to try to raise funds for the church, or, do things, but rather just really to trust Jesus, and allow him to lead us. And we're not here to condemn those who are in the marketing. We understand that for the way they do things now in a lot of different churches, but we would encourage them to make sure that they don't cross the line per se, because Jesus has he has a big whip, doesn't he? He's able to turn the tables over, and so we'll just leave it for that at that. Let you guys ponder it in your own mind and hearts about that. Our next question, Chris, for you here this morning, it takes us over. Well, first of all, synoptic gospels. What does it mean by synoptic gospels? Maybe I don't want to assume that everybody knows. Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, the synoptics, the three that are the first three, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke. By the word synoptic, it's intending to say that they're very similar in their construction. And so they're referred to as the synoptics, where when you compare what John's is written very, very differently than the other three. So even in what's presented, the first three gospels are presented very much the same way. Of course, they all are written historically, but John takes a very careful examination about the deity of the person of Jesus Christ. So when we refer to the synoptic gospels, we're talking about the first three of the four gospels, and it's the construction, the makeup of them. They have a lot of similarities. They have a lot of common stories that you can find in them all, whereas John doesn't have a lot of the same similar stories that you might find, or historical events that the other ones do. And there are so many things about John's that are unique to his. So it's just an identification of the similarities of the three gospels as opposed to John. That's the easiest way for us to understand it.
Perfect. I hope that helps everybody. And we're to talk about one of those events that happened in the Synoptic Gospel in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the question is, Chris, what's the significance of Jesus calming the storm? Of course, we find that in Luke chapter 8 and Mark chapter 4. And, they went out on that Sea of Galilee once again. And there was this great storm that came up. And Jesus is asleep in the boat, as we understand from Mark and also for Luke. Tells us that Jesus fell asleep in the storm, and the storm rose up, and they were fearful of their death, being drowned. And one thing we always got to paint the picture of those who are in the story. These guys lived on that sea. They fished it probably since they were little boys, basically, and they were fearful for their death. So there must have been a tremendous storm that blew off, probably like we get our Santa Ana winds come gusted through our canyons, probably like the canyons around the Sea of Galilee. They brought up these monster waves. So what's the significant, Chris, of Jesus calming the storm in our great story here?
Yeah, I guess we could say the biggest of the big parts of it. Again, it really helped to establish yet again the uniqueness of this person, Jesus. Because, yeah, these are people who are seasoned in doing this. And if anybody's ever been to Israel, you look at the Sea of Galilee and you think, all right, it wouldn't be an easy thing to swim across, but it's by no means some massive body of water. Because you can see across to the other side pretty readily, and going across it's not a big deal. I've also been there when a big storm came up in the middle of the night, and you can imagine it might be difficult to try to row if you're rowing into the wind. And as it would be, the storm appears to have been coming in off of the Mediterranean, because that was the direction that they were going, was towards the west in the way that it's laid out for us in the text. And they were having a very difficult time. But what they were amazed at was when they woke Jesus. The interesting part about that, Jesus reminds them in a kind of a backhanded way of saying, you guys are worried about your own life, but if we all die, we all die. And so Jesus is who he is. Well, what's amazing is that these guys say, who is he? After he's able to calm this storm, they say, who is he that even the storms, the things of the natural world, they have to obey him? And so that should be our takeaway from this, that these men who understand everything of the natural phenomena that was taking place, the storm, that when Jesus said, be still, I'm of the opinion that it wasn't like, all the waves kind of took their time to calm down, and it was a gradual thing. I believe when Jesus said, be still, I think you wouldn't have seen, a ripple on the water instantaneously.
You and I have never talked about this passage before, but that's 100% what I believe, because I like to use the applicational part of of a person's life. And obviously, we go through raging storms in life. There might be some who are watching us on his channel right now that are really struggling, Chris, and going through difficult times, because we live in a very difficult world, and the Lord would simply say to them right now, be still. know that I'm with you. I've never left you or never forsake you. And Chris, let me, on that thought, let me read with you the rebuke that Jesus gave him in Mark chapter 4, verse 40. He says, "Have you still no faith?" Isn't that an interesting statement that he said to his disciples? Why don't you comment about that a little bit?
Yeah, and here's the thing that I would take away from that, and what you can kind of in the application part of it. Again, they're so concerned about their own well-being, and again, it must have been something like they were not accustomed to, because their reaction was the type of a reaction that you get from people who weren't used to being in that kind of a predicament. But the I think that you could probably make the case that even the way that it was presented to Jesus was a place of complete panic rather than saying, Lord, if you were to wake him and say, Lord, we've done everything that we can, including if they had taken the time to pray and they had taken the time to, do all the things that rational people would do. Instead, they're in a full blown panic. And Jesus's point to them, if it was just as simple as, well, when you wake me, don't wake me in this complete panic. Don't you have the faith to know that I'm going to preserve you? Because by preserving you, I'm preserving myself as well, obviously. Because if they're going to drown, they're all going to drown. So his point would be, there's no need for panic, even as difficult as it is. Let's recognize who it is that's in the boat with us, if you will. And that it could have been much differently presented in a much different way of, Lord, we've done all that we can. We've prayed and we've, leaned on our own abilities here, but we can't do anything about this storm. And then you calmly, Lord, what can you do? What will you do? Instead, it's just complete panic. And then even to the point of accusation, why are you not concerned about our well-being? You're back there sleeping in the boat. It's like an indictment, if that's really what was being said, and it gives the impression that might be it, because Jesus's reply to them was somewhat stern and was supposed to make them, kind of, yeah, maybe we should get a grip here. So,
One of the things I see so often in life that God is always trying to draw faith out in our lives. He wants us to grow in our faith. And, a lot of times the storms of life is kind of that proving ground per se, Chris, the testing ground to be able to. We don't like it. I don't like it when storms come, but they come. And yet he wants to find out. I think it's so beautiful the way he say, kind of get your eyes off the storm and get your eyes on me and rely upon me. Where's your faith? And this passage not only reveals, I think, the humanity of Jesus. We see him taking a nap in the back of the boat, but also shows to them, to the disciples, his deity, that he had power over the winds and the waters, how they obeyed him, like Chris talked about. We agreed probably instantaneously how he had that great power with one quick word of the Messiah. The storms were calm and really became calm. And I think this is what the apostles really did marvel at the display of Jesus, Chris, and the supernatural ability over the elements. And this is one of the great statements or showing how Jesus is God to the disciples and certainly to us, that he has power over the elements themselves. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about Jesus in his deity as we see in this story?
right. And it comes right down to their exact same statement that we had talked about before. Who is he that even the creation must obey him? That's the summation of it when they look at everything with all of what had taken place. In a moment, I believe instantaneously it went from total chaos to the calmest of the calm. And so I've often thought, and there's so many of these kind of occasions where after Jesus had died and resurrected and he had begun that work in the church through the apostles and the signs and the wonders, I just picture them from time to time just reminiscing about those. Like, remember that time when we were on the Sea of Galilee and we were out in that storm? And, we do this as well as believers, that God has brought us through something that was so tumultuous And we're able to look back in retrospect and say he was there during it the whole time and he brought us through. And it really does help you for down the road. Well, God's put me through things before and he's brought me out of them. And if he doesn't bring me out of this one, I'll understand why when I see him face to face. And so it's that comfort that comes from knowing that God is able, he is capable. We can come to him with these problems. Better that we don't do it in a place of panic, but the idea that we can say he's one who knows, he's one who is able, he's compassionate and merciful, and he's gracious and loving, and I can come to him because everything must obey him. I can trust him.
I think that's the application of the text for us here today, is that we really can trust him. And but he also has that way of, as we saw in the first story, really he doesn't put up with the phony and baloney religious ceremonies per se. He wants to come to wants us to come to him with that clean heart. I love it in the psalm where David said, "Thou desires truth, and truth within the inward beings." He knows our thoughts, he knows our hearts and our tension. He wants to come to us honestly, like we saw here in the boat. Lord, we're fearful of our lives, and we just come to the Lord. And as the disciples were saying it, they were thinking about drowning, and if we come to Him, He's the good shepherd. He's going to meet us where we're at. He's going to try to encourage us to walk in faith, to trust Him, as Chris just encouraged us all in. And so I hope you enjoyed today's program. We got many more questions ahead of us. So let me just name a few for next week's program. Why did Jesus curse the fig tree? Chris, we'll let you do that one next program. And did Jesus baptize people? Or what about this? What can we learn from Jesus feeding the 5,000? So tell your friends about the program, and we look forward to spending more time with you. Chris down in Texas, I'm here in Southern California. May God richly bless you. Thank you. Bye bye now.